brief because we all want to get on the road, I know. So we can have it last as long as we want to through conversation, but I'm not going to give as formal a presentation as I originally thought I would. So is that all right with everyone?
Yeah.
Can we do that? Okay, I see applause in the back. That's great. So thanks for coming today, everyone. The controversy of Grandma's bedroom. So this is an interesting story that I thought I'd share with you all. Because I think we all come into history through stories, right? Do you all remember the first story that got you interested in history? Does anyone?
Yeah.
I very clearly remember mine. And I was in 4th grade. Some of you may have heard this story before. And I read the book Farmer Boy by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I wanted to be Almanzo. I wanted to enter my pumpkin into the county fair. I wanted to have a pig. I wanted to train my own team of oxen. I work oxen into every presentation I do, by the way. So I want to do that. I read that book. I fell in love with it. I think I read it twice back to back, and then that same year in Miss Dahlgren's 4th grade class, we did our first oral presentations, our oral reports, and it was what I want to be when I grow up. Nothing super crazy for 4th graders to comprehend. And I got up there, and I was a little teacher. I was tiny. I was the littlest kid in my class, and I got up there and. When I grow up, I want to be an old-time farmer. So I want to be an old-time farmer. And Miss Dahlgren, bless her heart, she goes, "You can't be an old-time farmer, TJ. That's just not something you can be." But Miss Dahlgren took me, and she taught me 2 things that I was able to track through my education and through my career, which was one, that you can write about it. You can write about it, and you can be a historian. So it was that 4th grade teacher that told me I could be a historian, that I could work in museums. And here I am today, so I feel really blessed that story has brought me to where I am. Here with you all, all of you amazing people here, which is always great. But it's also brought me to the Bruin Troop Heritage Farm, which is now a farm I get to work on, which is pretty cool. And the Bruin Troop Heritage Farm in Maplewood, Minnesota, is this amazing farm. We have 12 historic structures on the farm, dating back to about 1890 up to about 1910, all owned by the same family, the Bruin Troops. And it's this great place to work, and it's this great place for me to practice what I love, which is history and telling stories, and particularly agricultural history. So I was able to track through the farmer boy history as I studied history in college and afterwards. There's a Bruin Troop Heritage Farm. Today we have our historic core is on 2.5 acres, and then we're surrounded by 22 acres of restored prairie. The farm is not in its original location. It was about a mile away, and if any of you are familiar with the Twin Cities, it was on White Bear Avenue. And it was the last farm, the last actually kind of home on White Bear Avenue. They're right across the street from the mall, Maplewood Mall. And the city really said, this is too valuable commercial property for us to have this farm sitting there. And there was talk in the late 90s about, well, let's have the city take over the farm and turn it into a museum and this, that, and the other thing. There was a bunch of referendums that year, and when the city managers studied what the result might be for passing a referendum within the city to pay for that, came back that it would not pass. And so the city then kind of very politely backed out of that joint venture, but then there was this grassroots movement within the city to save the farm, and it was saved. And in 1999, it was moved about half a mile to this open space here in Maplewood. And the farm, so here's some early pictures of the farm. In its original location, this top picture here is the farm, and you can see right in the middle there's the original house. That was built in 1891. And then here we have the house again. That photo's from about 1905 there. And the farm started as a wedding present. So this is William and Ida Bruin Troop. William was a German immigrant, and Ida was the daughter of German immigrants. And they got married in 1891, and Ida's father gave them 40 acres and a little house and a couple of cows. And that's how the Bruin Troop farm started. And they had, at their height, about 20 cows, potatoes that they all delivered to St. Paul. And so we actually still have the original Bruin Troop 1933 truck that used to cruise up and down Summit Avenue with the potatoes, the big houses in Summit selling potatoes. There, but here's William and Ida. Ida is grandma. So when we talk about grandma's bedroom, we're going to be talking about Ida. Obviously in this picture she's not grandma yet, but this is grandma here who we'll be talking about. So here's the original house that we will be kind of referencing today. The room is on the back side over here. So actually the room that we're talking about, you see the lean-to in that top photo there off the back, that's the room we're going to be talking about today, grandma's bedroom. So that house looked like originally. By 1912, the family had done well enough that they were able to hire an architectural student from the University of Minnesota to really completely overhaul the house. And this is the 1912 remodel here. Here we go. So that original house is still encapsulated inside this one, which is really cool, right? Super cool. But we have this beautiful arts and crafts 1912 brick manse, really showing that the family had arrived as some substantial farmers just outside of St. Paul. And here's the house today. Really lovely home and a great piece of our museum here. When I came on to the Maplewood Area Historical Society in September, I asked where my office was, and I was told I didn't have an office. So I was like, well, I need an office. I'm here 40 hours a week, I'm full-time. I need an office, and that was really controversial. It starts to get even more controversial. There was a table in the basement. They were like, well, you can work there. You can work off the kitchen table. No, I can't do that. And along with that, I've got an amazing board of directors who are so engaged and so involved with the museum that they're there almost every day having coffee themselves. So it's like I need my own space to do my work. Just think about those of you that are directors, if 6 of your board members were sitting at the same table you're trying to work at for 5 hours a day, 5 days. Yeah, right? Yeah, I know. Just the energy in the room kind of got, oh God. So anyway, grandma's bedroom's to the back of the house here, so it's actually in the opposite corner again, back there. And I said, well, I think after a lot of polite politicking and trying to get everyone engaged on the fact that I needed my own space, so why don't we take grandma's bedroom and we can turn that into an office space. Now it can't just be an office space because a lot of our income comes from weddings. So that's our necessary evil is weddings. And grandma's bedroom had served as the bride's room for getting ready. So I was told, no, we can't do that because the brides need it, the brides need it, the brides need it. And I said, well, we can really do this where it can be an office space, it can be an interpretive space, and it can be a bride's room as well. So we're not going to miss out on that. No, we can't do it. So it took me about 3 months of maneuvering my way through different board members. What I don't know that I've mentioned is that 2 of our board members lived in this house. So we've got grandma's grandson and his wife are on my board. So there's also this really, deep connection to grandma's bedroom. Here, when I arrived, and I actually shudder at this photograph. This is grandma's bedroom now. I'll show you. And it looks like grandma's bedroom, right? Doesn't it look like grandma's bedroom? And so here's grandma's bedroom. And the interpretation when we would do house tours, you'd walk in there, and the interpretation, which was really difficult because the interpretation for the house was written by Bill and his wife Radel. I don't know that I could write interpretation about my family home. It would be really strange. I don't know, if you think about the house you grew up in, how would you justify giving public tours and be able to do it in an engaging way that wasn't somehow, related to your own really personal, deep-rooted feelings, but instead, why is this a museum and why is this story important? So the interpretation in this room when we would do tours was, and this is grandma's bedroom, that's grandma's bed, that's grandma's sewing machine, and there's grandma's chair. And that was the interpretation. And then people would walk around, and, oh, there's a bunch of old stuff in here, and that's great, okay. And so this was Grandma's bedroom. We had a really interesting board meeting where I went to the board with a look board and was going to ask for $3,000 to renovate, or to reinterpret this space here. For me, we've got a lot of really great house museums in Minnesota. And I think about Glen Sheen, I think about the Ramsey House, where their collection is the family's collection of stuff. That's really cool. We didn't have that. And in fact, what we had here in this house was, once the building was moved, several of our board members wanted to really interpret the house as the 1960s. Right, yeah, right? It was an interesting thing, but that's because that's what Bill and Ray Dell really remembered, right? And so there's this weird sort of, personality conflict. We didn't know. You walk in, it's very strange. You walk up to this big, beautiful arts and crafts home, and you expect to walk into a big, beautiful arts and crafts home, and instead you walk into a 1990 remodeled kitchen, and then a living room with furniture from the 1940s, and then into the parlor with furniture from the 1960s and 70s. And even when you go back in the 60s and 70s, there was teal carpet and green walls and that kind of stuff. And when the house was moved, it was decided that everything inside would be painted this yellow color because the name of the paint was antique gold. That was the justification. There was no study of what the wall colors were or anything. And so when I came in and I talked to Bill, I was like, Bill, what the interior of this house look like? And he's like, I don't know. Bill could tell you when Daisy the cow calved in 1956 and where on the farm that was that he found the calf. But he could not, he was just like, I don't know, the inside of the house, I don't know. But he said, what I do know is that everything was wallpapered. Everything was wallpapered. And of course, that was very common because with plaster walls, wallpaper is not just decorative, it's also functional. And Bill said, my dad swore up and down he would never allow wallpaper in this house again because in the 1940s, they had to steam off layers and layers and layers of wallpaper and off the ceilings and everything else. So there was this real resistance to wallpaper, but we also didn't really have any wall coloring other than this green from the 1960s and a dusty rose color from probably about the 1940s, probably right after they steamed the wallpaper off. We do not have the money to figure out what sort of wallpaper and that sort of thing. So my justification to the board for how we were going to reinterpret this space was we're going to be sympathetic to the era of the house, but we're not going to try to reinvent what it looked like when the Bruin troops were living here at that time. That board meeting was very interesting because I put the lookboard up on the table, and I said, I just want you to all be clear, this is not going to be a design by committee. I will do my best to interpret this lookboard with your permission, but you gotta let me do it. You gotta let me just run with it. And they did. And so here, afterwards, so this is my office now, which is pretty nice. But it's also an interpretive space. So instead of walking in and saying, this is Grandma's bedroom, here's the bed and her chair and her sewing machine. Now I get to walk in here, and when I have people come through and I talk about the Bruin Troop family, I actually get to talk about the family and in this house. And so I get to talk about, right here we have that photo of the original house in 1891 there. We have that hanging, so I can say, we're in this house right now, even though you walked up to this great big brick house, and I get to talk about that remodel and everything else. And we've got this crack in the wall here, and you can see some of that rosy pink and green paint as well. So the board really wanted me to paint that over to disguise it, and I was like, no, that's the story of the house. We can talk about that, those paint colors, and that's kind of cool too. And talk about how houses change over time. We found William and Ida's original wedding certificate. And since this house and the farm started from their wedding, and this is now a bride's room, we're really focusing on that story as well. So we get to say, you know, to the brides that come, you get to celebrate your special day here. Well, this whole farm started on a special day, a wedding, way back in 1891. So there's this real way of tying an interpretation to this money-generating necessary evil that we have as well. Here we have some documents on the wall that we found. So we knew that the family lore was that this wedding present was 40 acres, the house, and a couple of cows. And then we found the transfer of deed from Ida's father to William, because why would you give a woman any property? You would give it to, you know, a man. It's really a lovely contract, and it says, you know, for 40 acres to be given to William Brewer and Troop for $1 and the love and affection of our son-in-law, which I think is just one of those really lovely museum things you find, right? You know, like, yeah, right? So we get to show that now, which we had never shown before. We never got to tell that story before because, of course, it was Grandma's bedroom with Grandma's bed and her, you know, everything else. But then this document is dated 1896. And we knew they were married in 1891, and we couldn't quite figure out, why would it have taken 5 years for this wedding present to have an official transfer of deed? Well, then we found William's citizenship papers, which were dated 1896. So not that, you know, a non-citizen couldn't own property. Now we're able to tell the story that we think we can piece together, that Ida's family wanted to wait until he was a citizen before they would officially give him this property. So that's another interesting component of the story that's a much broader story we get to tell, related to the weddings, related to what happens in that room today, related to the original history of the family and everything else. Now the real controversy of the room, anyone want to take a guess what the real controversy of the room was? The light fixture is one, the color of the walls was another. Williams, or Bill Bruintroop, who is the grandson of Grandma, had a sister, Joan. She was born in that house and she died in that house. She lived there through adulthood, but that was her only home she ever knew. She loves strawberries, loves strawberries. And as an homage to Joan, we have this fabric here reprinted. It's, I don't know if any of you are familiar with William Morris. It's The Strawberry Thief. And it's from, it was in 1890 the most popular designer fabric on the market in both Europe and in America. And so we found a place that could reproduce that for us and still talk about kind of the arts and crafts feel of this home now, which feels more sympathetic than those doily type curtains that were there before, if you remember that picture. And we can talk about Joan a little bit too and her love of strawberries. So it's another way of bringing that in and telling more about the family story. And I think being respectful to telling this story in a deeper, more broad way. Now the light fixture was pretty controversial. There was a 1950s, I bet you there are people in this room that have this light fixture at home still. It's that slightly upturned rectangle with the wheat on, you know? Yeah, a lot, yeah. And that's what it was. And it was up there. And on my lookboard, my original lookboard, I had a chandelier from my last office. And I thought, well, it's free. We don't have to pay for it. I'll just do that. The board hated it. They thought, oh, God, that's the ugliest thing in the world. And they said, we think you should find something that's vintage and more appropriate for the house. So I listened to that. I didn't tell the board. I listened to that. And what I did is I found this light fixture in Stillwater. And I was like, that feels really vintage, really appropriate to the era of the house, really 1912, pre-World War I, right? And then I found the Sears electric, gas, and combination lighting fixtures catalog. And there's that same light in there from 1910. So same era of the house. And so I was able to justify to myself then that we can be sympathetic to the era of the house. And while this room, which in 1912 was a sitting room and a sewing room, wouldn't have had a light fixture like that. That's maybe something that would have been similar over the dining room table, so we can talk about that as well. We can also show this and say, you know, that light fixture in 1912 cost $17.30. And those are the kind of details that I think help make a better story for people to connect to today, right? Because then you can talk, well, how much money is that today? It's about $560, you know? So, you know, we've got all these interesting components now that help us tell a much better story of the family, and I think a much more respectful version of the family and grandma, you know, Ida. Thanks. Okay. So, it was a controversial project. It was controversial because we were changing things. It was controversial because we were telling the family story in a different way. It was controversial because of the color. It's too dark. It was controversial because of the light fixture. It's not what was there and people remembered from 1950, even though the house very clearly has these arts and crafts proportions and woodwork and everything else in it. But I think it was the right move. And I think it was the right move to do because I have really fallen in love with this story of the Brew Troops and their farm and their family, and this is a way I feel like I can convey that to the public as they come in, but it can also serve as my office, which I need. It can also serve as a bride's room, which we need, the necessary evil for that money to come in to allow us to do what we do. And I think in the end, the controversy will wear it off. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. But it is what it is. And instead of trying to make it look like a 1912 sitting room like the Brew Troops would have had, we're able to tell a much broader and better story by how we've reinterpreted the room as opposed to try to restore the room or something along those lines. With that, we want to get out of here. I'll take some questions if there's any questions. Yeah.
Are the chairs original or is that something you brought in?
They're brand new chairs. So I don't want to use artifacts in an office space, you know, like I don't want to use parts of the collection. But I wanted again to be sympathetic to the era of the house without making it necessarily look too much like we're trying to disguise furniture to be what was there. So those are brand new chairs. Yeah.
So what are you actually using as like a flat writing?
It hasn't arrived. My desk hasn't arrived. So that's why. So my desk will go along this wall over here. I got a new desk that has a. It's kind of a classic look, but it's got a standing desk on it too, so it will fit in stylistically with the room. But I can stand and work too. And then behind that, there's the mirror, so that desk will serve as the vanity for the brides when they. So lots of multi-purpose in this room. Yeah.
Is the original building on the National Register?
It is not.
Okay.
Yes. No. Any other? Oh yes, in the back.
So it's going to be your office. How do you protect your computer, the stuff you're working on?
I have a closet with a lock, and actually there's a large walk-in closet in this room, which was put in 1912 and seems enormous to me for that era. But it's big enough for us to put filing cabinets in and put our printer in the closet, so we can keep a lot of that out of the way and keep that controlled. Our desktop will be kind of stored away. And then my plan is to get a framed, I don't know what yet, but a gilded frame, something to put over the monitor to disguise the monitor on the desk when I'm not there. So that's my plan, but yes, Virginia.
So you had mentioned that the rest of the house is 60s glamour or whatever, 60s.
It's something. Yeah.
Do you hope that this sympathetic design will lend itself to future projects in the rest of the house?
That's a great question. While working on this project, I've been thinking about that. I'm thinking about, well, you know, we're not really creating a 1912 space here in the terms of a historic home the way many of us maybe have historic homes, where you walk through and you're now in a room that was the room of the time. And so I'm starting to think, well, in the parlor, which is very sort of almost 1970s actually, could we utilize that space in a different way where we're again hanging documents or reproduction images on the wall to help interpret another part of the story, and then use that space as a meeting space or that sort of thing. The living room, which if we all walked into today, we'd probably recognize it as a dining room, has a large dining table, a beautiful built-in china cabinet with glass front and everything else. Very, that white oak woodwork and stuff. Very arts and crafts looking. I'm trying to think of, can we utilize that space in a different way to actually utilize the space while using images or maps or something to tell part of the story, but then have it not be a historic home? I'm thinking about those things, which again may be very controversial, I don't know, but it's how do we utilize, I also need to think about how do I utilize this space in a way that makes the most sense to tell the story. And there's a real identity crisis happening with this house right now.
I was just wondering how many visitors you have and if they kind of go culture shock from room to room, if they're different eras.
Yeah, so we get about 10,000 visitors a year. Not all of them go into the house.
Oh, okay.
So we don't do open house tours. Generally we'll do limited house tours on some of our event days and that kind of stuff. But it is our office as well. It's the only heated building we have on site. So it is when I'm there or someone wants to come do research or whatever, that's it. Yes, though, I think I've noticed when people come in and they come in through our kitchen was heavily remodeled in 1990. And they're like, there's two reactions. Either people walk in and they're like, oh, look at all the cabinetry. See, they had to have lots of cabinets because they had this great big kitchen. And someone's like, oh God, they must have had cabinets. And all that freestanding stuff in 1912. And actually our kitchen in 1912 was a huge walk-in pantry and then a separate kitchen. Today in 1990, it was remodeled to make one big space. But then it's all this really light oak cabinetry in there. There's an industrial washing machine, a dishwasher in there. There's a modern refrigerator, a modern stove. But people walk in there, and then we also have an industrial red hospital floor in there. And people walk in and it's either oh, look at the floor. Yeah, they had red floors back then. And so there's this idea that we're the experts. So this has to be what it was, right? But then there's also this other response, which is, this really feels a lot like my grandma's house, like today, right? And so there's this there's a disappointment there. And then you walk into the living room, and at first you're like, oh, look at all the old furniture, and they start looking at it, and you're like, no, this doesn't quite feel right. And then you walk into the parlor, and it's just really weird. There's this low kind of serpentine back 1960s, lounge sofa in gold, and there's this 1970 case TV in there, and you're like, what's going on here? So, yeah, so I think people don't, when you walk up to that house and you're like, oh gosh, this is gonna be awesome, going to a 1912 arts and crafts house, and then you're like, I don't know, yeah. So, yeah, I think there's some issues we need to work on with that interpretation as well. Yeah.
So 2 questions. Where were these documents prior to being displayed? And how has this new office space changed your relationship with the board?
Great questions. The citizenship papers and the wedding certificate were actually still in the possession of the family. So those are on loan from the family now. The transfer of deed, that's actually a reproduction of it. We don't have the original up there. And that was there were reproductions of it already in our collection. So then I tracked down the original, which was in a file folder. Not acid-free paper or acid-free file, just so it's not. So anyway, yes. So the documents there. The relationship with the board, I think, on some levels has been great because now I have a space I can meet with board members individually, or small committee groups or something can meet in this space. For some of the board members, it was too much of a change. and I think it's still really hard for them to see this as being valuable right now. I'm hoping that will change. And I have, again, a very, very invested board, and they are a lovely board who has done a lot to preserve. We have 12 historic structures on our site. And during the hiring process, I went out multiple times to look at the buildings to make sure I wasn't going to inherit decrepit buildings that were falling apart. And they're in great condition. So our board has really invested the time in that. So there's a lot of personal investment in this site. And this was a big change. And so I think it's improved some relationships. I think it's maybe hurt some relationships. But yeah, change will do that, right? Yeah.
For the wedding side of things, do you add more seating in there?
Nope, so there's these two chairs here, and then there's a bookshelf that will go in, and then there's a small desk with a chair, and then there'll be my desk with a chair. So that's, our bridal parties get the whole house. Yeah, I know.
We do too.
Yeah.
And that's my question.
Yeah.
We've now had a bed, with a sign on it, says do not sit on the bed, break 3 times in the
Yeah.
last 6 months. And the volunteer that put it together is like, if I have to come back here again.
Yeah.
So we're just closing that room off now because people are people.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point too. You know, my board really wanted antique furniture in here, and I was like, no, we're not going to do it. We'll do new. It will be, again, sympathetic to the era of the house, but I'm not going to have guests that come and are part of a wedding party be jumping on and sitting on and oddly photographing, and weird stuff happens in weddings, as you know. Like, yeah. So yeah. So no, but they do have more space. This is just primarily where the bride. There's doors, so the bride can get ready in that space. Yeah.
Do you think maybe if you put a sign that says killer bed bugs on the bed, it'll have
There's a museum somewhere on Instagram, and I saw that said the last person that sat in this chair died. And I wrote it on the bed.
Yeah.
But I haven't done that yet. I know.
What's that? Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Really. I still have some money to spend. That's good. Yeah, I feel good. I think we'll come in right about $3,000 for the whole thing, which includes all new furniture, new drapes. Those drapes were custom printed for us, so that was kind of expensive. But who doesn't want a William Morris drape? I think that's pretty cool.
So you have weddings right on the farm then?
Yeah.
You do? Okay. And the bar?
Every weekend.
Every weekend.
Our first wedding is next week, is this coming weekend. And through the end of October, we're booked this year. Every weekend.
Every weekend. Do you have to be there?
No, we have a wedding coordinator who knows that. So I actually get Fridays and Saturdays off. I get an actual weekend off in museums, which is unheard of. Because that's when weddings are, and I'm just like, I'm not gonna do that. If I've got brides getting half dressed in my office, that doesn't make for me doing a lot of work, right? Okay. Thanks, everyone. This has been a great conference, and applaud yourselves. It's been great.